community of people who want to develop society, develop our democracies, solve sustainability challenges that you are in right now. And I see quite a few of our members, but also quite a few guests, so welcome. The bathrooms, if you need to use them, are out the door behind the elevator or down one flight of stairs. In the case of a fire emergency, we need to use the stairs by the elevator or the stairs out here. So that was the practical information. Now, to today's theme. We're here to talk about the democracies of the world. And Norway, as we always do, rank very at the top, very close to it anyway. And we have been for years. So does that mean that this today is not a conversation about us? I'm sure Jon and I will get into that. But we at Oslo Center absolutely feel that this is a conversation that is about also the Norwegian democracy. Because if we rank at the top, we become complacent. And we don't think about the things that we actually do need to develop about our democracy. And researchers at the University of Oslo have also created TINDE, which I'm sure many of you know, tilstandsanalyse for det norske demokratiet. So about how we can measure democracy for well-developed democracies. What happens when you cross that threshold? You're at the top. Do we have no problems? Are we immune to the global trends? Among other things, that's what we're here to discuss today. At So Central, we have been looking into citizens' assemblies, democratic innovations, to see how we can work on democratic resilience, and we will get into that later. But for now, I will hand over the microphone to Jon Løvdahl, who is one of our members here at So Central.
Thank you. So my name is Jon Løvdahl. I work as the Executive Director of the Oslo Center. Oslo Center, a Norwegian organization working on democracy assistance abroad. We work with political actors, political parties, civil society, women and youth, and provide technical assistance or work in partnership with local organizations to assist in inclusive decision-making processes and public participation. My background is from democracy assistance. I have worked for several years in various countries supporting political and electoral processes and working with mainly political parties. Thank you, Marina and V-Dem, for accepting our invitation. I sent the invitation I started to discuss with V-Dem in November about this day, because I expected that this year's report will get a lot of attention because of what we have seen in the US. So we are very happy that V-Dem prioritized to come to Oslo. And you can also see that the interest is quite big on the topic and the report. So we are very happy to be able to have this discussion today, that so many of you accepted our invitation, because these issues that we are talking about affect all of us. And it's very good to have these discussions and this dialogue together. And this is also what we want to achieve with the session today, is to discuss the report, to discuss the findings, but also to reflect and discuss what does that mean for us. What does it mean for the work that we as a country is doing abroad in our development policies, priorities, but also do we as citizens and organizations working in Norway can do in order to strengthen democracy, home and abroad. And I'm not going to go into, I think all of us have read the V-Dem report, so I'm not going to go in and say anything about it. But I think that what we have seen is that democracy is something that needs to be nurtured. It's not something that is there and it will always be there. You mentioned that we are not immune. And I think what also the report tells us is that what happens globally also impacts us in Norway. So we are looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you. Thank you, Marina, again for coming, and thank you all of you for coming. Let's have an open discussion. Marina will present a report. There will be time for questions, answers, comments. And also let us try to identify what we can do beyond the seminar today, and use this opportunity when so many people are around and so central and with the Oslo Center to see if we can also continue a discussion for the future. So thank you again, and now I give the floor to you.
Thank you everyone for the warm welcome, and it's a pleasure to see that there is such a huge interest. I mean, we knew that the United States will attract attention, of course, but I think we didn't even imagine that it will attract so much attention. I come from the University of Gothenburg at the V-Dem Institute. We are located just 3.5 hours away from you. But before I start, I need to say several things about V-Dem. V-Dem is a large international product. The headquarters is located at the University of Gothenburg, but there are people who are doing the methodology, other things that are located in other countries as well. So in total, we have 134 country coordinators, 23 project managers, so regional managers. There are 9 now. From this year, we have 1 more regional center. So it's now 9 regional centers that are located in different regions of the world. And we use expert coders to get the data, more than 4,000 expert coders. And the thing that I need to say it for people who don't know V-Dem, because it's not us people who sit in Sweden who decide how each country is rated. Because we are sometimes criticized that if the data set comes from Sweden, then Scandinavian countries are always in the top. That's not the case. So it's not us who decide how the United States is rated, how Turkey is rated, and which ratings India gets. It's people, most people who rate it are people from academia. They have PhD background. They are the ones who study their countries, and they are located in the countries for which they are providing the ratings. So people who are rating the United States are usually scholars who are academics who are located in the United States. So this year report, here you see the summary for 5 sections. So the 4 sections are usually quite typical. So we discuss global trends, we discuss which countries are in trend, and then the 3rd and 4th, we delve into the more specifics. And the 5th section is usually the one that is year specific. So each year we pick up something that is like the most important finding of this specific year. And this year it was the United States. Since we are with the time pressure, I will skip the 3rd and the 4th section, so I will only discuss the global trends and which countries are driving this trends of regime transformation, and then go into the United States. But for those of you who are interested in other countries, please go to the report. We briefly discuss other countries that are in change as well. So where do we stay as the world as such now? So as a global one, here is the map. Shades of blue, more democratic countries, shades of red, more autocratic countries. And this is on the liberal democracy index. And liberal democracy means you have electoral democracy, which is the core of any democracy, which is free and fair elections. And then there is a liberal component. That means that on top of having free and fair elections, you should also have checks and balances on the executive power. So to what extent the executive is constrained in his or her ability to perform actions, and also protection of civil liberties, protection of equality before the law, and everything that comes with it. So this map would have looked very differently 30 years ago. This is something that we saw during the last decades. The global level of democracy was declining. Some countries stayed quite stable, like China stayed on the same level for all the 30 years. But many of those countries were more blue shade. And you see even the United States now is kind of somewhere in the middle on this index. It's there, 0.57 this year. We'll come back to this later. And if you take the average, the global average, by giving equal weight to each country in the world, that means you give the same weight to the United States as, say, to Seychelles in the Indian Ocean. By that measure, we are now back to 1995. And this is a statistically significant change since 2020. So sometimes it looks like marginal, it looks like something only above 10% on the total scale, but you saw we never, although the scale for liberal democracy grows from 0 to 1, as a world as such, we have never been above 0.4 something. And now we are back to 1995, so 30 years by country averages. By population-weighted averages, we are back to 1978. And that means you now adjust for the population that lives in countries, and you give more weight to more populous countries, countries like India and the United States, and less weight to countries like Seychelles or Kosovo. By territory-weighted averages, it's back to 1989. This is the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And by GDP-weighted averages, it's below, at its lowest point in over 50 years. Since 2019, we are below the level for 1975. So the decline is the most dramatic. Sometimes we get questions why we use the 4 different measures to discuss what's happening in the world, because it gives you a perspective that not only democracy is declining, you see it's declining in all of them, so it doesn't matter which metrics you use. But it also tells you what's happening is that is populous, large and economically powerful countries that are declining. So it's not like only Seychelles or some small countries that are driving this trend. And it's before we knew the population weighted, it was for a long time, it was India mostly, but India accounts less than half of this decline in terms of population. Other countries are contributing quite a lot. But now with the GDP, you see this last sharp drop. This is the United States declining. And this global picture, when you use 4 different measures, it tells you that the global center of power is now shifting to more autocratic countries. They are the ones who define the global liberal order, whether it will hold or not, how the whole world order, how the world will be governed during the next decades. Now, in Democracy Report, we quite often use population-weighted averages, and the reason why we do it is because we think of democracy as the rule of the people. And that means that for the world as such, it matters how many people enjoy democratic rights and freedoms in the world. And then, of course, if you think from this perspective, countries like India matter more than countries like Seychelles. Because there are more people, 1.4 billion people in India, and less than 100,000 in Seychelles. So you can use the same data that we have in V-Dem data set, but classified to provide a more simplified lens on what's happening in the world by using regimes of the world and classifying all countries into 4 different categories, and then a gray zone between them. So it's 2 types of democracies and 2 types of autocracies. And as I said, for democracies, there is this core element, which is elections, electoral democracy, free and fair elections, and everything around elections. And then the liberal component also has everything that's on top of elections, separation of power and protection of civil rights and liberties before the war. And the same for autocracy, close autocracies like harsh dictatorships, countries like China or North Korea, which don't have any even basic protection of any kind of human rights. And then electoral autocracy is the one that has some kind of elections and some kind of freedoms, but they are not good enough to qualify as a democracy. And you should think of those as very, very large proxies. So sometimes for electoral autocracy, for example, you will have so diverse countries, so like Russia will fall into this category, which is quite close to being a harsh dictatorship, but still not harsh enough to compare with, say, Afghanistan or North Korea, but it will also include countries like Hungary, which is a lot more democratic than Russia, but still does not qualify as a democracy. So it's, of course, very hard if you have 180 countries in the world. In our data set, there are more. We have several countries that we are not rating. But if you have, of course, it's very hard to classify them all into 4 different regimes. So those will be very large proxies. And if you look by those measures, this is what has been happening during the last 50 years. So you see, first thing you see is that these close autocracies, harsh dictatorships, 50 years ago, they were the most common type of regime in the world. And then for many, many years, their numbers were declining until approximately 10 years ago when they rapidly started to rise in numbers again. This is 35 as of 2025. We now have more closed autocracies than liberal democracies in the world. And last year, we got the first closed autocracy also in Europe, which is Belarus. For many years, it was in this electoral autocracy group. But situation there deteriorated, and now it slashed back to this harsh dictatorship countries similar to North Korea or China that control almost every single aspect of your life. Liberal democracy, they were increasing in numbers for many years, again 45 at maximum, and then they are again declining in numbers, 31. You see this for electoral autocracy and electoral democracy, it looks like as if electoral democracies are increasing in numbers, but what's de facto happening is that liberal democracies are downgraded to become electoral democracies, so it's not a positive trend. And for electoral autocracy, they are decreasing in numbers only because, again, they are declassified to become closed autocracies. So by this measure, we now have fewer democracies than autocracies in the world. This is the second year in a row. We hit this threshold last year, we crossed it. It's now 87 democracies and 92 autocracies. Then if you look by population, it's even worse than that, because this is the same number, but it gives you a perception of how many people live in each share. This is world population in billions. And you see, again, this is a sharp drop. This was India. For several years, we were not sure about India. They were in the gray zone democracy, gray zone autocracy here. Since 2019, there is no uncertainty anymore. They are now fully here in electoral autocracy. But again, it's not only India, because you see the total decline continues. India entered this here, but there we're still declining in number. So it's still like the rising number of autocracies in terms of share of population. So it's now 74%. This is something that you saw from our report, highly cited. 74% of world population now live in some type of autocratic regime, and 20 years ago it was only 15%. And it's even worse because if you look at numbers, this is something that we saw this year. In terms of liberal democracies, they are the least populated type of regime of the world. And then combined liberal democracies and electoral democracies still have fewer population living than closed autocracies. So then you can delve into data. So this was an aggregate index in terms of what's declining, but you can zoom in and see which aspects of democracy are driving this decline. First, 2000, this is 25 years ago. This is approximately when the third wave of autocratization started. And this is, you see, the aspects. The way you should read this graph is that if you're above the diagonal line, there are more countries that are improving on these aspects that are declining. So you see, for example, freedom of association here, freedom of expression. There were 54, 52 countries that were improving in terms of these aspects, and then like less than 5 that were declining on those aspects and countries. And now compare this to 2025. All of them are down. every single aspect. The only thing that remains so far unaffected, close to zero, is suffrage. The moment you have suffrage, like you don't remove, like people have the ability to vote, but the quality of elections is declining as well. So you see here, this is the quality of elections. The most affected aspect here is freedom of expression. For many, many years it has been like that. They are the first ones to be under attack. It's media freedom, academic freedom. 44 countries are declining now, only 11 countries are improving. And the ones that are improving, if you look into data, most of those countries that are improving are only the countries that are recovering. So they are trying to get back to the levels that they have lost. So they are not truly improving compared to their best level. There are very few countries that are now improving historically, not recovering from previous backsliding. And then also things that are declining the most are things are deliberation, so the extent to which government gives an explanation to the decisions that are made, freedom of association, also clean elections. So which countries, and then trends, what we call trends of regime transformation, so which countries are now in change, and this is as of 2025. So this is the graph again that gives you a perception of what has been happening during the last 50 years. This dotted blue line shows the number of democratizing countries, and red line shows autocratizing countries. And you see that here, 30 years ago, in the mid-90s, 73 countries were democratizing at the same time. This is after the end of the Cold War, the fall of Berlin Wall. So many countries democratizing at the same time that, like Frank Fukuyama at that moment, were on the end of history. We thought that liberal democracy will be the end point for every single country in the world. It's only the question of time when everyone gets there. And then only several years ago, at the end of end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, so apparently here you see that the number of autocratizing countries started to rise. And then it accelerated during the last decade, it basically accelerated. So it started, sometimes we get questions, who were the first, like, it's very hard to say when exactly they started, but usually we think about Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Vladimir Putin in Russia, they were one of those first prominent autocratizers. Here you will get Erdogan and then Viktor Orban coming to power. So here and there you have in the end, you have the United States. So again, in terms of population, the number of countries now, 44 autocratizing in 2025, only 12 20 years ago. In terms of share of world population, again, 41% and 9% 20 years ago. And now compare these to democratizing countries. It's not only fewer, it looks like 18, but it's only 5% of the world population, and half of that is Brazil that is recovering after autocratization under Bolsonaro. And this is the reason why we so much talk about population-weighted averages, because if you look at countries that are now what we call standalone democratization, the one that are true, so not recovering from backsliding, but true improvers, these are countries like Seychelles. Countries like Timor-Leste, very, very tiny, the Gambia, very, very tiny countries that are really improving and going against this trend. Only Brazil here, everything else, the countries that are here, you see are countries like India, the United States, until recently also Turkey and Russia. Now they are not in this count, and this again, this number should be interpreted, 44, it's only the ones that are deteriorating now. There are many more countries that have already declined and have stabilized by now. Countries like Turkey and Russia are not in the count. They ended somewhere here. They have established a stable regime, and they are not declining anymore. But that doesn't mean that there is anything good happening for those countries. That's why we also very careful with interpreting. We sometimes get this question, it's like there is a small decline from 50 to 44. Yes, but it only means that there are slightly fewer countries joining this trend. Again, very careful, because the methodology only picks up when it aggregates into a substantial decline. When it's still a marginal decline, we are very careful with declaring that this country is truly autocratizing. It may be just, some fluctuation. And then you see that this number, the country of democratizing, it's not increasing. And that means that countries that are out of here from this count, they have established a regime, so they are not returning. That they are not reversing this trend, because the countries that reverse the trend, countries like Brazil, they would be included in this count, redemocratizing, improving again, restoring the same level. So as long until this number of count for democratizing countries starts to increase again, we will not see the reversal of the trend. So it's very careful, it's very tricky how to interpret it, but at this moment we stay with the claim that so far we see no signs of crescent. So it has been going for at least 25, and we don't know what consequences will be because of the United States. It's still too early to say how many countries will be affected by what's happening there. Here is the map, again trends, the one that are improving and declining now. Here it's not the level of democracy, it's a magnitude of decline here. Again, the darker the red, it means the more you have deteriorated from the way you were, and they were of course at all different levels. And the darker the blue, it means the more you have improved compared to your lowest point during the last, and they all, for all of them, it will be some reference point in time, because the United States, for example, joined only last year. But like, for example, in India, it has been going for more than a decade. So we will come back to that later. But it's all starting from the point that they started this regime transformation. It's going with different speed. Here, for example, it's military coups. Here it's executive aggrandizement. Brazil is recovering from executive aggrandizement. Same in Poland. Poland is recovering from what happened under the Law and Justice Party. And again, I know I'm repeating, but it's for people just to grasp it. Like countries like Russia, Venezuela, Turkey are not colored because they have already established a regime. They are no longer deteriorating. It's already there, like stable for the last several years. It doesn't mean that they were not affected by this trend during the last 25 years. So now the United States, you see that this trend has been going on for 25 years and has now reached the United States. So that's why it's so difficult also to predict what happens next and how many consequences it will have for the world during the next decade, now that this major stronghold of democracy in the world is also affected. And here I'm skipping all the discussion about autocratizing and democratizing countries because, again, we are short on time. I want to get into this because this is fundamental. I think you all have seen this graph. It has been, I think, everywhere in the media. This is liberal democracy index in the United States compared to average of Western Europe and North America. This is black line is the United States, and the blue dotted line is average. And you see this Western Europe and North America is also declining, but it's a marginal decline. The United States, very sharp drop back to 1965 on its level. And it's, again, the red one here, this is Trump 1. And the point, again, we make this claim and we look through the data set. This is the most dramatic decline in American history. It's not, we are showing only the last, since 1955, but we looked into the data set, the whole data set that we have, and it goes back to the French Revolution, 1789. This is V-Dem data set. It has never, the United States has never experienced such a sharp drop in its history in more than 200 years. 250, almost 250 years that we are covering in the data set. The closest comparison that we have to Trump 2.0 is Trump 1.0. This is the only closest comparison that we have. You see, this is the decline. This is 4 years under Trump administration, first Trump administration. Already below the average. At that point, it was back to 1978. It never fully recovered under the Biden administration. It hardly restored back to this decline in average for Western Europe and North America. And then within only 1 year, this small drop, technically because we use an episode of regime transformation, it picks up when the index started to decline, starting with this marginal, technically it's 2 years, but the first one is marginal. It was election years when we saw the decline in freedom of expression, when Trump was attacking the media and was already then declaring that media the enemies of the American people. So this is the index picked it up, so it technically starts in 2024, but this sharp drop, it's 2025. The second comparison that we did, and like out of curiosity, when I saw this, I came to Staffan, which is my boss, and he saw like, don't tell me this 1965. Because those of you who studied the American history, they will know that 1965 is a very symbolic year in the American history. This is the year of the Voting Rights Act. This is 1 year, 1964, this is the year of the Civil Rights Act. This is like those who study American history, they think that this is the year where true democracy in America started, where everyone got voting rights, where segregation ended, where racial and gender segregation ended. So it's very symbolic that we are back to 1965. And then this so rapidly, the other thing that we looked into the data set, how often we had this such a magnitude decline within 1 year compared to everything that happens in the data set. So if you look at the last 25 years, there are only 6 countries that managed to outperform Trump. 5 of them are military coups in Africa and Thailand. And 1 is self-coup by Sayed in Tunisia. So only 6 instances during the last 25 years managed to inflict a major change on the LDI index within 1 year. Everything else was more gradual and stepwise. If you look at the whole data set, again, going back to the French Revolution, there are 35 cases like this. Almost all of them are either military coups, where the democracy is dismantled overnight and you just proclaim martial law. A war started, like invasion of Norway by the German, again, like this democracy dismantled overnight. And if you exclude wars, civil wars, and military coups, I think it's only 1 or 2 cases. But one prominent case is Adolf Hitler in Germany, which managed to dismantle democracy in 53 days, who came to power also through elections and then dismantled it. So that gives you in comparison, like 0.14% outperformed Trump in the whole like last 250 something years in the whole data set in terms of speed of deterioration. And then we looked at another thing. This is how it happened during the last 25 years, during the third wave of autocratization, how typical executive aggrandizement happens. If you don't think about military coups, which are now very rare, it only happens in sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes in Thailand, but for other countries it will not be a typical pattern. Now the typical pattern is an executive aggrandizement. This is piecemeal dismantling of democracy stepwise, year by year. You come to power like Viktor Orban through elections, and then you start to introduce laws, and then you gradually, slowly decline on democracy index. If you compare to some prominent cases, I mean, I'm careful with claiming that they are the most prominent ones, because for some people, most prominent would be other examples, but the ones that you quite often hear in the media, this is Viktor Orban in Hungary, you hear Vladimir Putin in Russia, then Erdogan in Turkey, Modi in India, and then we included also Serbia, and these are the only 3 countries here, the one that are still ongoing, Hungary, India, and Serbia, where it's still ongoing in 2025, which are, in terms of total magnitude of decline, above the United States. So if you compare in terms of speed of deterioration here, the closest competitor, Viktor Orban, it took him about 4 years, more than 4 years, to achieve the same magnitude of deterioration. Serbia, about 8 years. And everything else is about a decade or more. So for if you think, and Orban is the one, and you saw in the news that recently Trump endorsed Orban for his next elections, but he was a lot more careful than Trump in terms of introducing these changes. It was going through legislation, through the parliament, and was going through discussions, some institutions. So he was, at least during the first years, he was trying to operate behind the scenes. So it was not so aggressive and so apparent and so open in what he was doing. So this is the claim again, that this is not only the most rapid decline in American history, this is also the most rapid executive aggrandizement in modern history. Only military coups outperform Trump in terms of speed of deterioration. In terms of magnitude, you still have a lot to go, if you see here compared to Viktor Orban. But in terms of speed of deterioration, how much you managed to achieve within only 1 year here, that's impressive. And then let's look what exactly happened, right? So this is an aggregate, what we talked about, liberal democracy index, but you can get, in terms of liberal democracy index, like there are different aspects that go into liberal democracy index, and you can get to the same level in different ways. And this is one of the important things that I forgot to mention, is that when we talk about that the United States is back to 1965 on level, it doesn't mean that we have the same problems that we had in 1965. Because in 1965, it was mostly about elections. It was about quality of elections, suffrage, that you don't have voting rights, that some part of the society is segregated and don't have the same rights. Now it's a different story. What's now happened is that liberal aspect of democracy is dismantled. And this is why you will also hear in the news that the claim with which we got into the even discussion in the White House, that the United States has lost the status of liberal democracy. So it still qualifies as an electoral democracy because elections are not affected. But it no longer qualifies as a liberal democracy because checks and balances on the executive are eroded. So we have, in liberal democracy index, what we have is the electoral democracy index. This is the one that measures this electoral aspect and everything that happens around elections, how free and fair elections are. And you have liberal component. This is the one that measures checks and balances on the executive and civil rights and equality before the law. If you look by that one, you see that this is what the most dramatic decline here, legislative constraints. And then the second most dramatic, this is civil rights. Here, in everything that goes into electoral democracy index, this one, it's mostly driven by freedom of expression. Everything else, there are some marginal declines here in freedom of association, but freedom of expression, the one that drives the decline, elections so far unaffected. I will come back to this later because elections are unaffected, also a little bit technical thing because we don't assess elections in years where you don't hold elections, so we don't know the quality of elections so far. The latest quality of election that we could assess was 2024 and was still conducted under the Biden administration. So checks and balances. This one, again, when we saw this was just like, wow, 1/3 of total magnitude of decline, lost 1/3 of its value within 1 year. This is legislative constraints on the executive. This is the extent to which the Congress constrains the executive. So the claim that we made, and then I think it summarizes basically the whole year of what has been happening. This is a rapid and aggressive concentration of power in the presidency. De facto, what has been happening is almost everything all major decisions were done through executive orders. They never even went to the Congress. They were never discussed in the Congress. There was zero accountability coming from the Congress. 225 executive orders in 2025 on major issues like determining how funding will be spent, like for major reorganization of some institutions, dismantling of US aid, and other major decisions made through executive orders. Only 49 decisions made by Congress. And if you look at what they were doing, it was some marginal things like let's reassign some financial assistance to national parks or something very niche. So no major decisions. De facto, if you look at what has been happening, the Congress has effectively abdicated its power to the presidency. So they were not even trying to constrain the president. Partially, you see a marginal decline here. It's smaller, it's still very, very impressive here in the judicial constraints, but partially, that's what the index does not pick up. But what happened with the constraints from the Congress is the Supreme Court's fault because it's for them to enforce the law. If it's enshrined in the Constitution that the Congress has so-called power of the purse to decide how funding is allocated, and that's not for the president to decide. But if the president violates this and takes this power from the Congress, the Supreme Court should intervene. And in many cases, they were either silent or they were postponing this. The index doesn't pick it up like well enough, I think, what has been happening. But it's something that, again, for those who know constitutional law well enough, they will claim that, of course, the true separation power can be enforced only if the judicial branch is acting well enough to constrain it. What we saw in the judiciary is that most of constraints came from the lower courts, from district courts or from states, on the state level something. So the Supreme Court was either silent or was even somehow trying even to empower certain executive orders by Trump. Here again, the next thing is civil rights. This is another component that go into the liberal component. Liberal democracy index is also liberal component. Civil rights, you see, this is the second most declining aspect. Again, very symbolically back to end of 1960s. Again, within 1 year. This is the protection of civil rights. A lot of violations is something that if you go, many human rights organizations have raised this as a concern, but attacks on protesters, attacks on demonstrations, basically putting in detention centers, many people who were trying to express their voice of dissent towards Trump administration. And then, of course, we saw also how often it happened and how violently some of those demonstrations were suppressed. Trump repeatedly also claimed that he will use big force against those who demonstrate and show any dissent with what's happening. Another thing, and that's with civil rights, but there is another thing that happens, is equality before the law, and we have an indicator for so-called transparent laws with predictable enforcement, and this is the one that declines a lot because Trump administration has become quite unpredictable in terms of how laws will be applied and who will fall under which law. This is the one, the index that indicated that picks up this in terms of how predictable and how transparent the laws in countries are. So it has become very sporadically. Some of the laws were implemented quite sporadically, I would say, and then it was not clear how they will be applied in which situations. And then the third aspect that's declining quite substantially, this is freedom of expression. This is the one that goes into electoral democracy index. This is the one that drives the decline on electoral democracy index. Freedom of expression, here you see, again, the lowest level in over 60 years. We looked into data that's apparently approximately the end of the Second World War. This is the level that it goes back. Enormous. Again, something that people probably who work in the media, they will tell you a lot more, but we know that, of course, that what happened with Washington Post and how Bezos just banned over to Trump demands. We saw these attacks on New York Times, that attempts to sue any newspaper or media channel that was trying to expose what the government was doing. They started to happen again. You see that started to happen already during the election year, when we know that Trump was already aggressive in rhetoric towards some media that were more pro-democratic, that were taking more pro-democratic stance. You see, again, it's not something new. Also, Trump had some decline on freedom of expression, but this one is quite dramatic. So one of the things that driving is also this index, and I feel it's not captured well enough by this specific index because we have only one indicator for this. This is academic freedom. We have a separate academic freedom index, and this one declines, again, the lowest point in American history. It's something that we didn't bring up here because it's not part of the liberal democracy index. It's a separate index that captures freedom of academic expression in the United States. And we have a separate report that done not by us, but by our partner organization in Erlangen. And they are writing about this freedom expression. But that's also something, again, when I saw this, I thought, Stefan, I cannot believe it. The US is below the world average in academic freedom because academia attacks on academia, financial restrictions on academia, the ones who tried to raise their voice against what was happening, it was just, I think, uncomparable. I mean, it's for any country that qualifies as a democracy, it wouldn't come as a surprise to people who work, I don't know, in China and North Korea, but for a country like the United States, that it could happen within 1 year, it tells quite a lot, I think. But again, censorship, financial coercion, intimidation, suppression, everything that was about freedom of expression. And one of the examples that I was given, our report has reached the White House, and we were already labeled immediately as a blatantly biased and irrelevant organization. And the response from the White House was that President Trump is a champion of freedom of democracy. So we are waiting to be sued, honestly. But it tells you quite a lot, that rhetoric that is used by the White House, it tells you quite a lot about what's happening in the United States. And then the final thing is that the one why I think the United States, this clean elections index, right? So as I said, that's something that we don't reassess if you don't have elections. So the last year when the quality of elections was assessed was in 2024. And this is the thing that I think saves the United States democracy from a breakdown. Because this index for clean elections, it weighs quite heavily in the electoral democracy index. As long as you have free and fair elections, you cannot be reclassified into electoral autocracy, even if everything else is quite low, because this is a very important aspect. And in my understanding, this is a true litmus test now for the United States in 2026, because if this index declines, and you see this is again Trump won, it has declined quite a lot. So if it declines in 2026, next year we may come out with a report that the United States has become an electoral autocracy. And that's, it would be, at that moment, I think we would all need some kind of protection from the authorities, because it's the only thing that, if you compare it on all other aspects, it already, like on some aspects, it's already lower than some of the electoral autocracies. And they see, again, the index doesn't pick up it well enough, but we already see in the qualitative assessment what is happening now in 2025 and also in 2026, that there are already some signs of threats and attempts to undermine the integrity of the 2026 elections. So this attempt, because elections by the Constitution, they should be organized by the states, but there are attempts to take them to the federal level, attempts to control them more at the federal level. So we know, like, at what it is hinting. So it's very, very, I think, hard to predict how it goes, but one of the things that we know also from the literature on elections, that elections are so-called like critical moments in time, so because they can be a window of opportunity to turn things around, but if they go well enough for an autocratizing governments, they can also help to stabilize the regime and to legitimize it. And this is also very dangerous. Because again, we had this internal discussion, because I said stuff on, okay, like maybe we should write in the report that this is a critical moment in time and window of opportunity for the American people, because if you look at cases like Hungary or Russia, they never had this after 2 years, because they had to wait 4 to 6 years until they had the next elections to try to exert at least some kind of accountability to their governments. And the United States, you have it like midterms and 2 years afterwards. And he said, like, well, we don't know, because it's from historical perspective, we don't know if it's a good or bad thing, like if you have elections so often, because the United States is very, very unique. So we don't have like any comparison to draw, and where we could at least somehow predict whether it's a good or bad thing when you have elections so early after an autocratizing leader comes to power. Because one of the things that could have happened is because like Trump knows that he has only 2 years until he has this election, and this is why he's acting so aggressively, so quickly. So it might be kind of a bad thing as well. So we are very careful with interpreting is it's a good or bad thing that you have midterms in 2026. But in any case, I think these pictures, it kind of shows well enough what's happening in the United States. It's SOS. So it's quite a dramatic one. And for those of you who still haven't read the report or haven't used our website, I just encourage you to go to the website and play with the data yourself, because we have online graphing tools. You can read the report. We have policy briefs and many other things. Yeah, thank you.
We have until 10, and we will now take questions, start discussions. I'm sure many of you have questions. I'm going to open with one. Another country that's mentioned as an autocratizing country is the United Kingdom. And it's not commented on very much in the report. But can you say something also about the trends in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I should have added, yesterday I was thinking whether I should add slides with the United Kingdom or not. I have them on my computer, by the way. I can show what's happening, because I have the United States and I have Italy as well, because we were thinking that it may come. But the reason, I don't remember which one this one is Italy, and this one is the United Kingdom. It's a similar graph, just make me sure. Yeah. Okay, so the reason why we don't mention it, because they don't show up in the top 10. So they're new autocratizers. They're of course very, very important for the European Union, but then again, we have 44 autocratizers, we cannot pick up on all of them. United Kingdom is a very tricky one, because it's a boundary case. It's only slightly above this threshold, but the index picks it up. So it's really we have a threshold for 0.1, and United Kingdom is 0.11. So it's just boundary case. And if you look into indicators, what's driving the decline, it's fully driven by freedom of expression and media freedom. So nothing else is happening there. We had an internal discussion in V-Dem how serious and how this one, but then first there is a general we should trust the experts, so they know what they are voting and why they are ranking it like that. And then we also consulted internally with our colleagues who are I don't know if you know Article 19, you probably know them. They're human rights organizations that are focused specifically on freedom of expression. And in 2025, they issued, independently for us, they issued a report about the decline in freedom of expression in the United Kingdom. It has, according to their level, the United Kingdom is the only country now in the European Union that is partly free in terms of freedom of expression, and it is at its lowest level in more than 20 years. So it's not us, we are not unique in reaching this conclusion. There are several acts that were introduced during the last several years that restrict freedom of expression and freedom of academic also expression. And there is also some information again, so anecdotal, so I don't know if anyone has done research on it, but anecdotal evidence that shows that some media are starting to self-censor. So they're very careful, especially when it comes to talking about Trump administration or other things. They're self-censoring. They're cutting some things from the media, so trying to be very careful. So I think this is the one that explains what's happening in the United Kingdom. With Italy, it's a slightly less. First, Italy is not a boundary case. Italy is clear-cut autocratization, so it's not only media freedom that is declining. Media freedom is a large part of it, but there are other indicators that are declining in Italy as well. And Italy is in a certain way a very typical case where a right-wing extremist party comes to power and starts to gradually, slowly introduce some restrictions. And it usually starts with freedom of expression, but then on civil society and other things. So with Italy, you also see that the decline is a lot more pronounced. So with Italy, again, we were not surprised because they were on our watch list, countries that could go in the wrong direction for 2 years. We were following it. We saw this marginal deterioration already happening, and then it just accumulated. Because if you see, like, you know, this marginal decline, we are very careful with proclaiming that the country is autocratizing, because sometimes, as I said, it might be something that can easily be turned around. Like Netherlands were this on this watch list for some years, and then they approved those. They kind of made this before it became a dangerous point. But with Italy, they were deteriorating, and then at some point they hit this threshold. So it was not a surprise.
Thank you. Okay, I've seen some hands. Would you? Yep, we have one here. If you want to, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Anne. I do a PhD now in political communication, so very relevant topic for me. So like the indexes or like the data is very much on like a national level. But also there has been in the last months also some wins, let's say, for like liberal democracy on a more local level, like just like Mamdani being elected as a mayor in New York City, or last Sunday, like Munich elected a very like progressive mayor, and also Paris. So I'm wondering kind of to which extent this more like the grassroots level of democracy is displayed, or yeah, if it, in order to leave maybe also with some hope, because I mean the data is pretty dark in that sense. But I see that also in the US, I mean their local resistance is still very strong. So to which extent kind of that is somewhat, I don't know, part of the data, or if there's a trend and also like resistance rising.
We do not do any data on local level, and there is a reason for it, because there was some discussion in V-Dem whether we can and should do it. But the main problem with this local aggregation of the local level, that if you go to countries, they will have like different divisions of how many levels you have, whether you should go, like sometimes it's 3 levels, like from state to cities, but sometimes you have like, I don't know, 12, 14. Sometimes it's not even consistent across countries, like India will be a mess, you know, kind of. So how you aggregate and how you measure it. There is, so it's hard to say, right? So we know that like locally the resistance happens. It happens also in Italy, in India, and also happens in Hungary, even happens in Serbia, which are quite autocratic countries. But we saw these demonstrations in Serbia against like this Novi Sad, you know, local events. To what extent it could lead to, you know, turning things around, it's usually, I would say, like context specific very. So it's hard to draw big conclusions. At least I have never seen like it done like on a global scale, trying to analyze whether it contributes or not. So it's always like, you know, country specific elements. And sometimes, of course, they contribute, and sometimes they lead to change, but there are also many examples where it doesn't lead to change. Right, it's like with protests against the same story with protests against the autocratizing regime. We know it sometimes works. It worked, for example, in South Korea, but sometimes it's like also there were also protests in Hong Kong and it didn't work. So
there are researchers at PRIO here in Oslo who look into that specifically if you're interested in that. But I think it's a great point, which is the V-Dem analysis does not show or capture the resistance. However it might look from a civil society or citizen perspective or a local elections perspective, at least not in the fullest sense.
We do capture, but we do it again like on aggregate federal level. So if it's something that happens only locally and like not a widespread, then it will not be, you know, something that the data picks up. So we have like this aggregate index for pro-democracy mobilization. But again, like it will pick up events like in the United States when they're happening across all states. But if it's something that happens very locally, then.
Yeah. All right, I have a question here.
Yeah, I can stand up. My name is Dag Hareide. You're talking about state society, but there is, since 2005, 2010, when this turned around, something happened in technology. And we have got, let's say, feudal technological regimes that are international, where there is no democracy at all. There is one person who is ruling meta, there is two persons ruling Google. And there is a system of surveillance, and it's changing because it's different in Palantir, for example, and what's happening with the new technology, ChatGPT and so on, we don't know. It's not the technology in itself that's necessarily wrong, but it's the way it's organized. So how do you include that? I have another question too about methodology, if you have the time, because it's the difference between economists, democracy index, and you. It seems that you come to the same results, but with very different methodologies.
Okay, thanks. That's a great question, because the first thing that I need to explain, this is not an explanation of why it is happening. It's only kind of explaining what is happening. So that's what the index is showing. Why it is happening is the research question, and there are like hundreds of papers written about like why things like this happen and how autocratization can be turned around and all other things. So technology is not like, a part of like measuring how democratic you are. But there are a lot of papers that study whether technology contributes to democratic backsliding. At least the general, it's not my research, but at least the general understanding of what I got from all the papers that I have seen is that technology could contribute, but it's always conditional if something else is happening. So if something else, there are some problems that you can pick up, if there is rising polarization in society, if there is some right-wing extremist leader or populist leader who wants to pick up and can use it. And an obvious example would be, kind of...
so
the technology.
Technology, yeah. Is it? Okay. It's my. Should I enter my? Yeah, let me.
Unless you want to look at the forest.
No, I mean, I think if it goes down, if I. Yeah. So with technology, is the thing that. Okay, it's easy to say that this like one of the contributing factors that drive the decline in the United States, but you have the same technology in Norway, and Norway is stable, right? So it should be something else, in the society, like some. The papers usually pick up on some big societal problems that can be exploited by populist leaders. And then, like, if they want to exploit it when they come to power, they can, of course, use technology to exacerbate and to pick up on this problem and to drive polarization in the society. And these problems can be, economic standards that are getting worse, rising inequality, some unhappiness about security concerns or corruption or something else that's happening in the society that is a big societal problem that the government fails to address. And then the populist leader who comes to power, he picks up on this problem and starts to drive that, like he or she knows the solution to this problem, and then like via this technology and echo chambers and all that, it can be exacerbated. So it's kind of a compounded effect, because unless you have this something, if you have societal cohesion in the society, it's harder to use the technology against the society. As I say, like Norway is not that polarized as the United States. It's harder to pick up, to drive and to come with this claim that I'm the solution to the problem. I don't know if it helps, but so technology alone is not to blame for what's happening.